And we have a call from Canada. We have Molly from Ontario. Molly, what's your question for Canon?
Hello, Canon. My question is about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So is there any theological significance behind why it happened in 70 AD? Why didn't it happen earlier, for instance?
It's a very good question. Part of the mystery of salvation history is the mystery of time. You know, St. Thomas Aquinas asked a question like, why did the redemption not happen immediately after the fall of Adam? Why did it not happen at the end of time? And so certainly a momentous action like the moment of the incarnation or the moment of the destruction of the temple that is the sign of the end of the Old Covenant, certainly those are very deliberate acts of divine providence. If I had to hazard an explanation of that one, it would be that our Lord, we know he died very probably as the 3rd of April, the year 33 AD, but certainly sometime around 30 to 33 AD. So the temple was destroyed more or less a solid generation later, right? So it's part of the patience of God. St. Augustine says that the reason that the temple and then the Jewish ritual that depended on it didn't end immediately after Pentecost was that, unlike the religious actions and sacrifices of paganism, which were always abominable, the religious rituals of the Old Testament, although they were only temporary and in themselves they could not save us, they were still prescribed by God for a particular purpose. And so it's as if the apostles wanted to give honorable burial to their mother, so these rituals were not abolished immediately. After the death of our Lord on the cross, they no longer were sanctifying, but they were not inherently sinful. So in that generation of transition, we know the apostles still prayed in the temple, for example. But in order to make it definitively clear that now the gospel had been promulgated, the Old Covenant with its ordinances and sacraments and sacrificial offerings is over, nothing could be more obvious than actually destroying the temple. Why particularly 70 AD? Of course, at the time that it happened, the calendar we now use that would define it as 70 AD didn't exist yet. The Jews had a calendar. The Romans had their own calendar dating from the date of the foundation of the city of Rome. So when it happened, nobody would have marked it on their calendar and said, oh, today it's August 6, 70 AD. But in retrospect, the number 70 is very important because it's also the number of the exile in Babylon when the temple was destroyed for the first time. So I think in the terms of God's providence, now that everything has sort of solidified and the dust has settled, we can look at the whole picture. It's not just random that it happened in the year 70. And by the way, the date that I evoked, that's more or less when we think it happened based on the account of Josephus, the Jewish historian. The Feast of the Transfiguration, we celebrate on August 6th, is the feast when our Lord gave a sort of foretaste of his glorified body. And of course, just the other day, we heard in the gospel about our Lord's prediction of the destruction of the temple and that he would raise it up again in 3 days. But of course, it's the temple of his body. And so again, after the resurrection of the true temple, which is our Lord, and now who lives in the mystical temple, which is church, the physical temple of Jerusalem becomes, as it were, irrelevant.
Hey, that's very interesting. Thank you.
And thank you for your excellent question. If I could add just one other little point, if we are not right about to ring the bell for the end of this segment. After the Roman Empire was Christianized, a generation after that, the nephew of Emperor Constantine, who was one to legalize Christianity, Julian, the apostate, we call him, because although he was baptized, he even was ordained as a lector in the church. He apostatized, and one way he tried to disprove Christianity was by rebuilding the Temple of Jerusalem, which is something we know that the Antichrist will do. And even many holy bishops thought that maybe he was the Antichrist. But we have historical accounts from the time from Jewish and pagan historians, not Christian apologists, Jewish and pagan historians who say that the temple kept collapsing when they tried to rebuild it, and even balls of fire would shoot up from the earth, and it did not succeed. So the rebuilding of the temple is not something, I know that there are bizarre American Protestant sects who want to do that, but the rebuilding of the temple is not, not something that we want to do or promote, because when it happens, it will be the sign of the reign of Antichrist. But when they tried to do it, it did not work. It kept collapsing.